I love that. Like in thinking about the just the tool and then the impact that this tool has on the organization, like both secondary and tertiary impacts, is that in essence you're having people reflect on their time and if it's being used valuably. But then it becomes an anchor point to prompt conversations to have a discussion with your team, with your manager, or whomever about the valuable use of that time. And then that opens up all of these other really interesting opportunities for impact in that you're introducing these other meetings that allow for a better exchange of ideas. But I think one of the things that's been interesting that you've mentioned, Brad, is the impact that this has on ownership in like a very, very subtle way. In that, as people reflect on their calendar and start to have these conversations and take control and responsibility for their time and making it exquisite, that's sort of reinforcing this idea that you can take more ownership over different parts of the organization. And this has been a big question that's come up in the last couple of peer groups is these relationships where people are like, oh man, like I just wish this person would take more ownership. And so this seems like a really interesting way to start to reinforce that culturally, and as a way to start to get more ownership from the different people that you're working with. So I wanted to open it up to you. How do you get people to take more ownership or increase their personal responsibility in their organization, either with using this tool or if there's other ways that you've seen people just better create ownership across their teams and organization?
Yeah, so I think this is a really fascinating idea, right? So I think about this in terms of like renters versus owners in organization, where like a renter is like, hey, I'm just here, I'm showing up, I'm kind of doing the work. I can't really affect sort of how we actually operate versus kind of a little bit more of an owner mindset, which is I can really come in and really shift things here. I'm not just showing up and, plugging in and taking off. Like I want to really be able to help author our path forward. And I think this is a very important separation that can happen. And my bias is very much towards the owner mindset, about how are we able to take on responsibility and really shift in terms of how our organization operates. And usually when people are saying, oh, I wish we had more owners, like they're usually talking about big things. But then if you look on the small side, it's like, well, do you force people to come to all the meetings? Like, do they have really, are you actually creating space for people to take ownership? Or are you just hoping that all of a sudden on these big issues that aren't convenient for you, that they take ownership? It's like, guess what? Like if you haven't shown or demonstrated or created a culture of people taking ownership in the small, they're not going to take it in the large. It just isn't the patterns that they learn to have. And so the thing which I think is really great about this energy audit is start showing that you can start small with how your time gets allocated. And that's the main thing that we have is our time. And so once you start affecting that, people start understanding they can take more and more ownership of what's happening in the organization. It's like this meeting and this time isn't just something I have to do. It's something I can engage in discussion with my community, and we can figure out how we can shift stuff. So I think that's a big one. And what that really points to is this notion that our time in our organization is ours. It is a shared ownership, and it is something that we can author and change. And I've seen this over and over again, for example, with engineers as they come into an organization, right? An engineer comes into an organization, when they first show up, they're like, the org is kind of where it is, the code base is where it is, this is just how it is. And then a light bulb goes on the minute like they really start realizing, wait a minute, this is all mutable. I can change this stuff. And I think the same thing happens from management and leadership standpoint when you get to this point of how do I actually affect change in terms of how time is spent and how our community operates. It just takes longer. And so this practice really helps people to start affecting that change a little bit earlier and figuring out how to engage in productive conversation with people about it. But the real key part here, it's our organization, it's our time, and how we actually spend that adds up over time. And then those patterns of behavior can say, how can we actually make larger changes in the organizations? So you asked a bit about like what are some of the things that you can do to help make some of these changes. One is ask for people's feedback. For instance, if you are actually running a meeting, ask for feedback about what is or isn't working in that meeting. Like, and then take actions based on that feedback. If it's your meeting to own, right? Like start demonstrating that people's feedback really makes a difference, that people saying this isn't working for me can really change things. Sit down with your direct reports, sit down with your peers and have conversations about what do we want to have be different. And these sorts of actions really start telling people that it really matters what they think. It really matters how they spend their time and that they can affect change in it. Because if you don't create those windows, you can't just expect people to start taking responsibility to change how the org really operates.